Welcome, everyone. We are so excited and honored to welcome Dr. Yael Ziegler for her talk, Isaiah's Prophecies of Consolation, the movement from Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah, in anticipation of from Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah. I'm just going to go through a bunch of little technical things quickly, which are that I either have already or will soon invite you to be a panelist. No pressure. That does not mean that you need to talk or anything. It just will allow you to turn on your camera. We'd love to see your face. It will allow you to raise your hand to ask questions. Dr. Ziegler will tell us how that will work. You're also welcome to put questions in the chat, which I can relay for you when we're taking questions. And yeah, please stay muted when you're not speaking. And yeah, we'd love to see your face. Dr. Ziegler is an assistant professor in Tanakh at Herzog College and Matan. As of September 2021, Dr. Ziegler assumed the position of Rosh Batei Midrash and academic director of Matan. She received her BA from Stern College and an MA and PhD at Bar Ilan University. Dr. Ziegler has lectured widely on various Tanakh topics in Israel, the United States, Canada, South Africa, Australia, and Europe. Dr. Ziegler is the author of Promises to Keep the Oath in Biblical Narrative and Ruth from Alienation to Monarchy, which has been translated into Hebrew. And her most recent book is Lamentations, Faith in a Turbulent World, which was released in June 2021. And we're really, really excited to have you with us today, Dr. Ziegler. I'm going to just turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chaya. I'm going to just put up my PowerPoint. You let me know when you can see it. Everyone see that? Yeah?
Yes.
Just nod if yes. Okay, great. Okay, great. So, in today's class, I want to talk about something that we experience really every year, from during the yearly experience of the Chagim. We go from the lowest point on the calendar to the highest point on the calendar, right? The lowest point on the calendar is certainly Tisha B'Av. It really records or tells the story, and what we read, we read Eicha on Tisha B'Av, which tells the story of Am Yisrael in crisis, right? We have the depth of despair. We have the national catastrophe of the destruction of Yerushalayim, the destruction of the temple of the Beit HaMikdash, the subsequent exile, the collapse of the Davidic dynasty, and of course, the sense of betrayal in our relationship with God, right? So that's really, I think, what we're experiencing on Tisha B'Av. We sense that God hasn't simply destroyed us, but also has subsequently abandoned us, right? We have a sense that God has hidden his face from the nation. And Eicha doesn't make a real effort to try to offer us too much hope. Certainly, Eicha ends on a note of despair, right? We have the ending of Eicha, Ki im ma'os me'astanu, katsafta aleinu ad me'od, right? So the end of Eicha, it really ends with God having rejected us, God being extremely wrathful with us. That's not a particularly positive ending, right? It's a particularly heavy ending, and there's a sense of that we haven't resolved our crisis, especially our relationship with God, which is why I think it's so surprising that 7 weeks later we find ourselves in Rosh Hashanah, right? We're in an entirely different space in every way, right? So we move from Tisha B'Av, the lowest point in our national annual experience, to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, right? Higher and higher points in our national experience, in our relationship with God, right? Certainly, if on Tisha B'Av we feel really a real sense of despair, on Rosh Hashanah we feel a sense of hope. We're looking towards a hopeful year, a year in which we are expecting and certainly praying for good things, right? We have a sense of optimism that accompanies us throughout this period of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, instead of feeling alienated from God, which of course is, I think, really one of the most difficult parts of Tisha B'Av. We have a real sense of connection to God, right? We spend the whole day, both on Rosh Hashanah, both days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, connecting with God, speaking to God, pleading with God, crying to God. We feel completely connected. I mean, that's the experience. I think also even on a national level, things have changed so drastically, because on Tisha B'Av, we're a beleaguered and persecuted nation. We have a sense of shame, right? There's a sense not just that we have brought shame upon ourselves, but we've brought shame upon God, right? Upon the idea of God's people, right? Which has really been violated on Tisha B'Av. But of course, Rosh Hashanah is all about assuming the mantle of a nation that has a destiny, a nation that has a message, a nation which is representing God proudly, with dignity, with nobility to the world. I mean, it's a really, really different experience. It's 180 degrees different. Instead of feeling that we've reached the end of our rope, we're really at the beginning again, right? We've restarted the cycle. And, really, I think the question that I want to address in tonight's shir is, what spurs this transformation, or what helps us along in this transformation? I mean, it's the summer months. Certainly Aleph Elul, we start with, thinking about tshuva. We start by thinking about, we say every day, Psalm 27, LeDavid Hashem Ori. There are things that we're beginning to do during this period that are meant to start turning our attention toward Rosh Hashanah. But really, the only thing that kind of navigates this transformation from Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah are the Sheva Dinechemta, the 7 prophecies of consolation, which, unlike other haftarot, are not chosen because of their connection to the parasha, but rather they're chosen to connect to this time period, which moves us from despair to optimism. That's why these 7 prophecies of consolation are chosen. And, that's really what I want to talk about, because I think that it's only those haftarot that really mark this time period and also teach us how we're meant to navigate this very significant change that happens during this 7-week period. Okay, so let's just look for a moment at these Sheva Dinechemta. I brought for you this list. It's a list that we experience every year. I'll bring it a few more times on our PowerPoint. I'm not expecting everybody to know it by heart, but certainly these are of the more familiar, I would even say more beloved haftarot. They're very beautiful. They're very lyrical. They're very filled with optimism and with promise. And this takes us from Echa to Rosh Hashanah. And I want to suggest that what we have here is a progression, a kind of a logical movement that pulls us from the depths of despair. And I always kind of picture Am Yisrael on Tisha B'Av kind of lying prone on the ground without strength. We're fatigued, not just physically, but theologically, emotionally, psychologically. Am Yisrael has kind of lost its bearings, right? And slowly but surely, what we have through these haftarot is the ability to get back up on our feet again and to reassume the mantle of our position as a nation with a destiny. And of course, also to begin to restore our connection to God. Now, the source for saying these 7 haftarot actually is a Tosfot in Megillah, where here the Tosfot tells us, we'll just start by reading. I mean, there's a whole bunch of discussions here of the different haftarot that we read, the special haftarot that we read around this time period. So, before Tisha B'Av, we read something called Gimel de Puranuta, 3 haftarot that tell us about the upcoming bad things that are going to happen. And here in this part that I colored for you in yellow, it says, Uvitar Tisha B'Av, and after, following Tisha B'Av, Sheva Dinachemta, we have the 7 haftarot of consolation, Vitarte de Tiyuvta, and following that, right, following Rosh Hashanah, we have 2 haftarot of Tiyuvta, meaning of tshuva, of returning to God. Here are the 7 haftarot of Nechama, Eluhen. That's what I've put here in blue. The first one is Nachamu, Nachamu. The second one is Vatomer Tzion. If you look at the left side of the screen, I've showed you also where they appear in Yeshayahu. The third one is Aniyah Soara. What's interesting about this one is that it's out of order. Look at what we have. Nachamu, Nachamu is from Yeshayahu Mem, from the 40th chapter. Vatomer Tzion is the 49th chapter. The third one is the 54th chapter, but the fourth one is the 51st chapter. So the only one that is out of order is the third. Everything else seems to follow the order of the chapters in Yeshayahu, in the prophecies of consolation in Yeshayahu. And this is going to be a question for the Tosfot. We'll see in a moment why this third one is out of order. The fourth one is Anochi, Anochi, Hu Menachemchem. That's what we have here in Yeshayahu Nun Aleph. That's a very beautiful haftarah. The fifth one is Roni Akara. The sixth one, which we just read this past Shabbat, the haftarah of Ki Tavo. Well, we needed a good one, right, to follow Ki Tavo, because it's a pretty hard parsha to experience. And this is really a fantastic parak in Yeshayahu. It's Kumi Ori, often translated as rise and shine and bring out your glory, glory. That's the beginning of chapter 60 in Sefer Yeshayahu. It is the 6th of these 7 prophecies of consolation. Now, the Tosfot goes on and asks the question, why are we makdim Aniyah Soara before Roni Akara? Why do we put number 3 before number 4? And the Tosfot answers, Derech hanichamot liot holchot umeshubachot yoter. The way of these haftarot is to become more and more consoling, more and more far-reaching in the consolation. There is an increasing progressive kind of consolation. And that's the reason that these 2 were put out of order. So, I'm not sure if I would go completely in that direction, but I would pick up on this Tosfot and say, well, it does seem as though there is some kind of sequence of events that are taking place here in these 7 haftarot of Nechama. And maybe before I talk about what's going on in these 7 haftarot of Nechama, I'll make I'll give you a brief explanation of what we're talking about in these 27 chapters in Isaiah. Okay, so from chapter 40 through chapter 66, Isaiah's prophecies are about the period of Shivat Zion. They're about the period of the return from Bavel during the latter half of the 6th century BCE. This is the reason that Isaiah has been it's such a difficult book to kind of trace its composition, right? Because the first part of Isaiah is about an entirely different time period. It's about the middle of the 8th century BCE. It's about the period of time in which the kings of Judea were Uzziah, Yotam, Achaz, and Chizkiyahu. And that's 200 years earlier. Starting in chapter 40 in the book of Yeshayahu, these chapters are the prophet's attempt to awaken the Judeans in Bavel, to bring them back to the land. They are contemporary with Haggai, with Zechariah, with Ezra and Nehemiah. We don't know exactly when, but the subject is the period of return to the land after the Babylonian exile. Okay, so that's just to clarify matters. I'm not going to talk about, any matters of authorship in the book of Yeshayahu. That's less interesting to me. But for my purposes, it's very important to understand that these prophecies are addressing the period after the Chorban, the attempt to try to restore. And that's, to restore Am Yisrael to its proper place, to restore Am Yisrael to its proper role, to restore Am Yisrael to its former glory that it had before the Chorban. This is very important because these are the prophecies that we experience every year following our reading of Eicha, following our commemoration of Tisha B'Av. Now, I'll just pause for a moment and I'll say, if there are any questions, I'd rather save them to the end. If there's any, burning questions, clarity questions, so please feel free to unmute yourself and, and just jump in. In any case, though, what is happening in these prophecies, and not just the ones that are chosen here for the Sheva de Nechemta, for the 7 prophecies of consolation, what's happening in these prophecies are that these prophecies basically are fixing Tisha B'Av, right? They are rectifying the story of Eicha. They're taking all of those descriptions of despair and exile and destruction that we had during the period of the destruction, and they're fixing them, okay? So this, I think, is really important to understand in the backdrop of what we're going to be talking about. And by the way, it is important just to understand that in general, we have this really very, very depressing book of Eicha. I think I mentioned before, but we didn't see it inside, that Eicha ends with this, really very kind of mournful or upsetting pasuk, right? Ki im ma'os me'astanu, you, God, have surely rejected us. Katsafta aleinu ad me'od, you have been excessively wrathful with us, right? So that we have this kind of very difficult ending of Eicha. Eicha leaves us there. And I think it is important to understand that in general, the books of Shivat Zion, Chagai, Zechariah, and some of the other books as well, have to contend with Am Yisrael's crisis, with the terrible events that Am Yisrael have gone through. It's not, you can't just erase the past. You have to address the past, especially if you want to convince Am Yisrael that the time has come for rebuilding, that the time has come for consolation. I'll just show you one example of this in Sefer Zechariah. Sefer Zechariah is in a constant, ongoing conversation with the book of Eicha, so that if in the book of Eicha, we have this terrible description of the old people who are sitting on the ground in Yerushalayim, who are putting dust on their head, who are putting on sackcloth because they're in mourning. But I think it's more than just mourning. I think that they are preparing for death. And what follows this description is an incredibly evocative and I think very poignant and painful depiction of the children on the streets of Yerushalayim who are fainting on the streets as they say to their mothers, "Where is grain? Where is wine?" These are their last breath before they collapse on the streets of the city. And along comes Zechariah and offers the opposite image. He says, and this was Rav Amital's, one of Rav Amital of Yeshivat Har Etzion, Alav Shalom. This was one of his favorite psukim to quote from Zechariah, Perek Chet, Ko Amar Hashem Tzvot, Od Yeshvu Zkenim Uzkenot B'Rechovot Yerushalayim. Old people, elderly people will yet sit again on the streets of Yerushalayim, and they will reach old age, right? Urchovot ha'ir yimal'u yiladim viladot misachakim birchovoteha. The streets of the city are again filled with children. But of course, here, it's not children who are fainting from hunger. It's not children who are about to expire from starvation, but instead the sounds of joy and playing is what fills the street of Yerushalayim. So Zechariah here seems to be in conversation with Eicha. This is just in order to establish that it seems pretty clear that anything that is written during the time of Shivat Zion has to address that kind of terrible situation which we left off with at the end of the period of the Chorban. Now, one thing seems clear, and that is that Chazal are very aware that Yeshayahu is in conversation with Eicha. In fact, they say all of the difficult prophecies that Yirmiyah prophesied, and here they're talking about the book of Eicha, Isaiah preceded these prophecies with a cure, right? And what this is a remarkable midrash. We're not going to go through it, but what this midrash does is it goes through every verse of the first chapter in the book of Eicha, and it shows you how Yeshayahu already offered the cure for each of these terrible things that happened. That even though we seem to kind of trail off at the end of Eicha with a sense of doom, with a sense of catastrophe, with a feeling that nothing can be rectified, that's not true. We already, what already is in place are these prophecies of consolation, which are, waiting in the drawer for the right time. Okay, so all of this is just to establish that what we're going to be talking about tonight, it seems pretty clear that Chazal are aware of this, and this is why they institute these 7 prophecies of consolation in order to accompany us and in order to kind of create this movement from Tisha B'Av until Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so let's start by describing where we find ourselves in that first weekend, that first Shabbat after Tisha B'Av, right? This year, Tisha B'Av what day was Tisha B'Av? It was on a Sunday. It was Nidche, right? So this year was on a Sunday. So we waited almost a full week before we got to Shabbat. And that week, we were accompanied by Eicha, by the book of Eicha. And the book of Eicha is a book that has no nechama. It has no nechama. It has no consolation. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that the word nechama does not appear in Eicha. It actually does appear in Eicha. The word nechama appears in Eicha 6 times. Let's look at some of the appearances of that word, right? So in Perek Aleph, we have in Pasuk Bet, Ein la menachem, she has no consoler. Ein menachem la, she has no consolation, she has no consoler. Ki rachak mimeni menachem, a consoler is very distant from me. Ein menachem la, she has no consoler. Ein menachem li. So it's a bit of a, of a problem here, right? There is the word nechama, but it is always used in the negative. There is no nechama. Now, the 6th time that the word appears in Eicha, that's in Perek Bet, and it's used as part of a rhetorical question. Ma ashvelach va'anachamech betulat bat Zion. What can I possibly compare you to so that I can offer you consolation? Ki gadol kayam shivrech. Your brokenness is as great as the sea. Mi yirpa lach. Who could possibly cure you? There's no cure. There's no consolation. Her brokenness is like the sea. So we're left swimming in this sea, salty water, tears. It's a tempestuous sea. It's a stormy sea. It's one that offers no consolation, no calmness, no ability to be consoled, right? And along comes the first haftarah, the haftarah of Parshat Ve'etchanan, and that's the beginning of Yeshayahu's prophecies of consolation. How does this prophecy open? Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, right? We call it Shabbat Nachamu, right? Why do we call it Shabbat Nachamu? Because the Haftarah opens with the word Nachamu. The first thing that we need after that very difficult experience of Tisha B'Av, we need God to come and say consolation. There is a way to be consoled. And of course, we refer to these chapters as the prophecies of consolation, not just because they open with the word Nachamu, but because the word Linachem is strewn throughout these chapters over and over and over. And of course, it frames a kind of a frame for these chapters. If the first pasuk opens with the word Nachamu, Nachamu, the last chapter, chapter 66, has a pasuk, pasuk Yud Gimel, right, verse 13, that uses the word Linachem 3 times in rapid succession. Ki ish asher imo tinachamenu ken anochi anachamchem uvyushalayim tinuchamu. Like a person whose mother is consoling them, so will I console you, and you shall get consolation in Jerusalem, or through Jerusalem, right? So the chapters are framed by consolation. It's the first thing that we experience in the Haftarah, in the first Haftarah after Tisha B'Av. Of course, there's no way to go on if there's no sense that consolation is possible. And other psukim, we're going to see other psukim in these chapters that offer consolation. One that we won't see in the Haftarot, but does appear in these chapters is, for example, this pasuk, Ki nicham Hashem Tzion, nicham kol chorvotea. I believe we read it as one of the Haftarot in Sefer Bereshit. But again, just to give you a sense of how dominant this word is throughout these prophecies of consolation, you're going to see nechama over and over and over. And of course, that seems to be the first thing that Chazal deemed necessary to give the Jewish people following the experience of Tisha B'Av. I'll say one more thing about this nechama, this lack of consolation in Echa. Before we saw this pasuk in Echa Perek Bet with the rhetorical question, Ma ashvelach va'anachamech, what can I compare you to so that I can offer you comfort? Ki gadol kayam shivrech. That's an amazing simile, right? I alluded to it before, right? It's as great as the sea is your brokenness. It also has a wordplay, right? The breakers of the sea and the brokenness of the people, right? It's a wordplay that works in English and in Hebrew. Shivrech and mishbirei yam, right? So there's a wordplay here. We're being told your brokenness is like the breakers of the sea. And of course, the yam is unbridgeable. The yam, you can't put an anchor into the sea. It's too deep, it's mysterious, it's vast, it's stormy, it's violent, it's filled with salty waters that, of course, as we noted, seem to be a sea of tears. And it is a frightening image to describe Am Yisrael's lack of stability, their lack of consolation. And I want to point your attention to an image that comes up in the fourth Haftarah. In general, we're going to go in order, but I couldn't avoid this, right? In the fourth Haftarah, the fourth Haftarah also opens with Nechama. Anochi, Anochi, hu menachemchem. God says, I am your comforter, okay? Look at what he says here. I am your comforter. Anochi, Anochi, hu menachemchem. You see what I put here on the screen? The Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Roga Hayam. I am God who knows how to calm the sea, right? I left you back there in Echa I left you swimming in a tempestuous, stormy sea where you felt you had no possibility of calm, of tranquility, of serenity, of consolation. Well, God comes and says, I can calm the sea and I can become your consolation because of that. Okay, so there's a lot of things that are going on in these haftarot, which are helping us to move through this kind of process of rehabilitation. I want to turn your attention to the second haftarah. The second haftarah is the haftarah of Parashat Ekev, right? So this is the haftarah that starts with the words Vatomer Tzion Azavani Hashem v'Hashem Shchechani, right? This is from Yeshayahu chapter 49. What's interesting about the opening of this haftarah is that, when we part from Echa, so I've already noted, we part from Echa in a very harsh way, right? We turn to God, you have truly rejected us, you've been excessively angry at us. But if you look 2 verses earlier, in Echa Perek Hey, Pasuk Kaf, we have a question which is kind of thrown at God. Lama lanetzach tishkachenu, tazvenu laorech yamim. Why have you forgotten us forever? Why have you forsaken us for the length of days? Okay, this question, which is kind of hurled at God, contains a real theological crisis, right? God, you've rejected us, you've forgotten us, you've forsaken us. Okay, now, there are only 2 places in all of Tanakh where these 2 verbs are used in conjunction with each other and in conjunction with God. Only 2 places is God said to forget and to abandon. And the other place is in our second haftarah of the 7 haftarot of consolation. And it starts out, we're hearing echoes of Echa. We're hearing Yerushalayim speak. Don't forget, the people are still in Bavel. The Judean exile is still happening. And Yerushalayim is still saying the same thing. God has forsaken me. God has forgotten me. That's what we hear. But unlike in Echa, here God responds. At the end of Echa, we hear the people saying, God, why have you forgotten us? Why have you forsaken us? And God doesn't respond. And here in Yeshayahu, Vatomer Tzion Azavani Hashem, V'Adonai Shchechani, God has forsaken me, God has forgotten me. And now we hear God's response. Hatishkach isha ula, can a woman forget her child? Merachem ben bitna, can she stop having compassion on the fruit of her womb? Right? What's the answer to that question? The answer is yes, in dire circumstances, like in Echa, she can. Right? Usually she doesn't, right? This, of course, is the example of the ultimate human relationship, the one that stirs compassion and love and sacrifice for the other and nurturing. And yet, as we know in Echa, because of the terrible situation of the famine in Jerusalem, we're told that the women were eating their children. And so this question is a loaded question that God asks. He says, can a woman forget her child? And then he goes on and says, Gam eila tishkachna. Even if in certain circumstances, because humans are humans and they're frail and they are fallible, sometimes a woman can forget her child. V'anochi lo eshkachech. But I, says God, I will never forget you. This is an unequivocal proclamation, and it's the second step. If in the first step, God gives us consolation, in the second step, God says unequivocally, I have not forgotten Jerusalem. I have not rejected Jerusalem. I have not abandoned Jerusalem. Moving on to our third haftarah. This haftarah is the haftarah of Parshat Re'eh, right? And this is the one that's out of order. Now, we saw that the Tosfot says that, it's in order of progression of more and more consolation. I don't know if I find that so compelling, but there is something interesting that seems to account for this order. And that is that in the book of Eicha, and of course in the period of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, Jerusalem comes crashing to the ground. But it's not just that Jerusalem comes crashing to the ground, it's that her glory is lost. Her beauty is lost, her prosperity, that which was her calling card to the world, that which made her shine and glitter and gleam, all of that becomes destroyed, right? Jerusalem loses her glory. Look at this description in the 4th chapter of the book of Eicha. We're told, Eicha yu'am zahav. How has the gold become dimmed? Yishneh haketzem hatov. The finest gold has changed. Tishtapechna avnei kodesh. Berosh kol chutzot. Those precious sacred jewels have spilled out into the street. And this is a very interesting description. Why are there jewels lying in the streets of Jerusalem? So I think there are two possibilities here, two very obvious answers. Number one, this is a description of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. When you destroy the Beit HaMikdash, which is filled with gold and silver and copper, and don't forget the Avnei HaChoshen, all of those precious stones, what happens is that all of these stones roll into the street, right? So that's what's being described here. That's one possibility. A second possibility is that nobody's picking up the stones. Why is nobody picking up precious jewels? Why does nobody care about gold and silver and sapphires and pearls and all of the precious stones that are so valuable? Of course, there's an obvious answer. Because there's nothing to buy. There's no bread in the city. Gold has no value if people are about to die of starvation, if there's no bread to buy. This is a fulfillment of a prophecy that we find in two different Nevi'im, in two different prophets who prophesied the events of Jerusalem's collapse. Yechezkel in Perek Zayin and Tzfanya in Perek Aleph. Both of them say the same thing. Kaspam uzehavam lo yuchal lahatzilam biyom evrat Hashem. Their gold and their silver will not be able to save them on the day of God's anger. And so they're left on the street. They have no value. They have no market value. And so they're just in the street. But there's a third point that I think has to be made about this description of these precious jewels, these precious metals that are in the street. And that is that it is clearly a metaphor. Because look at the next pasuk. Look at pasuk bet. B'nei Tzion hayikarim, the expensive children of Zion, hamisulaim bapaz, who are valued like gold. Echa nechshavu lenivlei cheres, ma'aseh yedei yotzer, how they have been treated as earthenware pots, the work of the hands of a potter. These stones are a metaphor for what is really the glory of Yerushalayim, what really is the reason that Yerushalayim glitters and shines and draws people's amazement. And that's not, of course, the actual physical beauty of Yerushalayim, but the beauty of the inhabitants of Yerushalayim. Well, we've lost all that because it's all lying in the street. Yerushalayim is worthless. Yerushalayim's people, her residents, are worthless. Once we had a Yerushalayim that was filled with pninim, with sapirim, with pearls, and with sapphires. And now we have a Yerushalayim that is filled with corpses that are treated as if They're earthenware pots, which of course, anyone who's ever walked through different tiulim in Israel knows how earthenware pots were treated, because everywhere you go, there are hundreds and thousands of pieces of ancient pots that people, when they finished using them, they just threw them into the street. Look at what Yeshayahu does in this third haftarah. He says, this is how we open the haftarah. Aniyah soara lo nuchama. There's that word again, right? She's an unhappy, an impoverished, storm-tossed city that cannot find consolation. Well, now, says the prophet, Hine anochi marbitz bapuch avanaich v'zadtich basapirim. I'm going to take all these precious stones and I'm going to put them into your foundations. V'sabti kadchod shimshotaich. I will make your battlements of rubies. Usha'arayich lavnei ekdach v'chol gvulech lavnei chefetz. I'm going to rebuild Yerushalayim, but I'm not just going to rebuild Yerushalayim into a regular city. It's going to be a city whose glory is restored. It's going to be a city that once again is going to be overlaid by precious jewels, that is going to have gems, and that is going to be shining and prosperous and a marvel to everyone who passes by. But look at the next pasuk of this third haftarah in Yeshayahu Nun Daled. V'chol banai limudei Hashem v'rav shalom banai. Right? And now we turn to the real jewels of Yerushalayim, the children. All the children will reassume their position of spreading the glory of God, because all of these children will be known as the disciples of God. What's the continuation of this pasuk? Al tikrei banaich ella bonaich, right? That's not really the continuation of the pasuk, but that's the limud, right? That's what Chazal say. Who are the builders of Jerusalem? The children of Jerusalem. The banim are the bonim. Jerusalem's glory is not just its physical reality, but it's the children who are serving God and therefore have this nobility about them. And that's the third step here in the promise, right? So we first have consolation, and then we have God's promise that he hasn't abandoned Jerusalem. And now we have the promise that Jerusalem's glory will be restored. Let's look at the fourth haftarah. This is the haftarah of Parashat Shoftim. It happens to be one of my favorites. It's hard to pick favorites, but I will say that it's my son's bar mitzvah, one of my sons, bar mitzvah haftarah. So I'm allowed to take this one on as my favorite, but it's just an amazing haftarah. And, I'll just say, God promised in the third haftarah, which of course was out of order, that he is going to restore Jerusalem to its glory, right? But one of the things that we have to understand about Yerushalayim is that Yerushalayim fell to the ground. Right, that's the description in Echa Perek Bet. It fell to the ground. The key word that appears over and over in Echa Perek Bet is the word Aretz. Right, all of the buildings of Yerushalayim are lying on the ground. The people of Yerushalayim are lying on the ground. The gates of Yerushalayim. Look at what we have here in Pasuk Tet. Tav'u va'aretz she'areha. The gates have sunk into the ground, right? What does it mean to sink into the ground? They're buried. Yerushalayim is buried. Yerushalayim is dead. Yerushalayim now is buried. By the way, this is not just a kind of a metaphoric image. If you had walked through Mesopotamia 250 years ago, you would have seen many buried cities, including Nineveh and Nimrod and Bavel, right? They were all buried. They were all buried in the sand. Well, Yerushalayim now has sunk into the ground. And in Pasuk Yud, we see the elders of Jerusalem who are sitting on the ground. They're putting dust on their head. They're putting on sackcloths. This is, of course, images of mourning, but it's more than mourning for another person. It is, I think, I mentioned this before, it's a preparation for death, right? They've put on their shrouds. They're rolling in the dust. Ki afar ata ve'el afar tashuv, right? They're preparing themselves for imminent death and burial. That's what the story, that's how the story leaves Jerusalem. Look at what Yeshayahu says here in this fourth haftarah. Uri, Uri, wake up, wake up. Livshi uzech Tzion, clothe yourself with strength, Tzion. Livshi bigdei tifartech. You're recognizing these psukim from Lecha Dodi, right? Clothe yourself in clothes of majesty. Look at the part that I put in blue. Hitna'ari me'afar kumi. Get up, shake off the dust. Dress yourselves again. Don't wear sackcloth. Don't wear shrouds. Don't roll in the dust. Get up, shake yourself off, and prepare for this next stage. It's time to stand up again and reassume your position of nobility. That's haftarah number 4. Okay, let's go on. Let's look at haftarah number 5. Oh, I'm sorry. There was I wanted to say one more thing about haftarah number 4. Haftarah number 4 is a very rich haftarah, and I think it also deals with another kind of major, perhaps the most major issue that Echa leaves us in. I alluded to it before, and that is the standing of Am Yisrael vis-a-vis the world at large. Okay, so we have this description after the destruction of Yerushalayim of blind people who are wandering through the city. Okay, so we could discuss whether these blind people are actually physically blind, or is it a metaphor? They're not seeing. Anyway, na'u ivrim bachutzot. There are blind people that are wandering in the city. Nigo'alu badam. They are covered. They're defiled with blood. Why are they defiled with blood? Because they're blind. They can't see, and the city is covered in blood. The city is wall to wall corpses, and so everywhere they go, they trip over bloodied corpses. Below yuchlu yig'u belvushehem. Everybody who has survived the carnage, nobody wants to touch them. They're so defiled. They're so disgusting. They're covered with blood. Suru tamei karu lamo. Go away, you contaminated one. They call to them, Suru, Suru, Altigao, go away, go away. Don't touch us. Who is saying these words? Who is calling to the people of Yerushalayim to go away, not to touch them? Everybody in Yerushalayim seems to be in the same boat. So who's talking to them? Look at the continuation of the pasuk. Ki natsu gamna'u. When they wandered around, amru bagoyim lo yosifu lagor. It was said amongst the nations, they can't live here. Right? This is kind of almost a haunting prophecy or prediction of what eventually happens to the Jewish people as they wander around the world. The nations regard the Jewish people as bearing the stain of their own contamination. Obviously, we're not talking about real blood, right? We're talking about something metaphoric. Everywhere where the nation goes, everywhere where Am Yisrael goes, other nations say, go away, you're disgusting. You can't live here. That is a very demoralizing image to take with us out of Echa. And so look at this fourth haftarah. Look at what the prophet says in Yeshayahu Nun Bet. Pitzchu ranenu yachdav chorvot Yerushalayim. Break out in song, ruins of Jerusalem. Ki nicham Hashem amo ga'al Yerushalayim. God is consoling his people. He is He is saving Yerushalayim. He's redeeming Yerushalayim. Chasaf Hashem et zra kodsho. God has revealed his arm, his sacred arm, le'enei kol hagoyim, in front of all the nations. V'ra'u kol afsei aretz et yeshuat Eloheinu. Everyone in the world is going to see this salvation of God. And look at what the prophet says to the people who are living in Bavel. He says, Suru, Suru, turn away, turn away. Se'u misham, leave there, leave the galut. Tameh al tigau, be very careful. Don't touch anything that is impure. Se'u mitocha, you have to go out of that impure place of exile. Hibaru, make yourselves pure again. Nosei klei Hashem, you who bear the vessels of God. You hear it, right? Yeshayahu here, or this haftarah in Yeshayahu, has restored Am Yisrael's sense of their own purity, their own nobility, their own dignity, their role vis-a-vis the world. If in Echa they are ashamed before the world, and the world is mocking them and looking at them as the bearers of the contamination of having been rejected by God, the world sees Am Yisrael as impure after the Chorban. Well, along comes this fourth haftarah and says, no, you got it all wrong. You are currently in a place of impurity, but you have a way out. Purify yourselves, return to Jerusalem, return to a place which is going to, where you're going to reassume your role as the bearers of the vessels of God, the bearers of God's purity. Okay, that's our fourth haftarah. We're going to move on now to the fifth haftarah, which I think is really very significant. So we've seen that God has offered consolation. We see that God has promised that he hasn't rejected them. We see that God has promised to restore the glory of Jerusalem, that he has promised that Yerushalayim, he's told Yerushalayim to get up, shake off the dust, prepare themselves. And now we turn to the people and we said, it's time for you to return to Jerusalem, to return to your role as the bearers of purity. And now we turn back to Jerusalem again. Jerusalem, the first image that we meet in the book of Echa is an image of Jerusalem empty. It's a very eerie image because, of course, Jerusalem was a place that was bustling with pilgrims, with people coming to bring korbanot, with people coming to the Beit HaMikdash, with people coming to the palace of the king. And suddenly Jerusalem is empty. Look at these words of emptiness. Echa yashva vadad. How has the city sat lonely? Hayata ke'almana. She was like a widow, right? All of these images of loneliness, they continue throughout the first chapter of Echa. What does our fifth haftarah tell Jerusalem? Harchivi mekom ohalech. Enlarge the place of your tent. V'yiriot mishkenotaich yatu. Spread out the size of your tent. Al tachsochi. Don't be stingy here. Make that city bigger and bigger. It's time to build Yamin Moshe, Mishkenot Shananim, Nachalat Shiv'ah, all the way out to Ramot and to Gilo and to Har Choma. That's what Yeshayahu is saying. He's saying Ki Yamin Usmol Tifrotzi. Right? Also sounds like Lecha Dodi. You're going to spread out to the right and to the left, right? And look at what he says here in this last line. Ki boshet alumaich tishkachi. You're going to forget the embarrassment of your youth. V'cherpat al minutaich lo tizkari od. You will no longer remember the shame of your widowhood, okay? So Yerushalayim is now being filled with people. And now that Yerushalayim is filled with people, the people who have come back, the people who have left a place of impurity and come back to reassume their role. Let's look at the Haftarah from this past week. Haftarah number 6. Now, I will say that in the book of Eicha, the description of the Gever in chapter 3 is a description of darkness, right? This Gever, this suffering individual who represents Am Yisrael on their way into exile, right? He is shrouded in darkness. Vayolech choshech v'lo or, b'machashakim hoshivani, right? He's in darkness. Why is he in darkness? We say it every day, twice a day during the month of Elul. Hashem ori v'ishi. If God is not with him, he doesn't have the light of God, right? And so that's the state of the Jewish people after the Churban. They are steeped in darkness. Well, along comes this 6th Haftarah of Yeshayahu, which says, Kumi, get up, Ori, spread the light, Kiva orech, for your light has come, Uchvod Hashem, alayich zarach, because God's glory rests upon you. Right? Darkness is covering the earth. The alayich, but on you, Am Yisrael, Yizrach Hashem, uchvodo alayich yeraeh. V'halchu goyim leorech, u'melachim lenoga zarchech. Right? So Am Yisrael has to reassume its role. What is its role? Its role is to reflect God's light onto the world. It's to be leor goyim, a light unto the nations. The idea is that God gives Am Yisrael his statutes, his laws, his morality, and Am Yisrael's goal is to reflect it upon the world so that the world will become a place of light, a place of truth, a place of joy and morality. And that's what we have in Haftarah number 6. And so now we have the people back in the city. They have reassumed their role. They've reassumed their role towards the nations. And we move towards our 7th Haftarah. I'm going to skip this. That was our 6th. Okay, our 7th Haftarah. Here we are in Sos Asis. Oh, there's a mistake here. This Haftarah actually goes till Samach Gimel Tet. But okay, that's just a typo. And here we recall that in Eicha, the people are crying. They're crying night and day. And they're being told, get up and, use your position as the Shomrei HaChomot, the guards of Jerusalem's wall, to cry before God and try to elicit God's compassion. And that's, of course, to no avail, right? In Eicha Perek Bet, the guards of Jerusalem's walls are unable to elicit God's compassion. Well, here we return to a city that is once again filled with people. But here, of course, the people are protected. Al chomotaich Yerushalayim, hifkadti shomrim kol hayom v'kol halayla. You see the comparison between the language that is used here and the language that is used in Eicha. We're told that here God has himself placed guards on Jerusalem's walls so that they should all day and all night pray to God and bring protection to the city. And so we've gotten back to the city. The city is once again rebuilt. The city is once again filled with people. The people have once again reassumed their role, and the guards of Jerusalem have begun to reassume their role of protecting Yerushalayim. Everything seems pretty good. And this is how the 7th Haftarah ends, with these words. Chasdei Hashem Mazkir, Tilot Hashem, right? I'm going to sing about all of the chasadim of God, all of the kindnesses of God, all of the praise that I have towards God for acting with compassion, with kindness. Let's read the last pasuk of the 7th haftarah. Bechol tzaratam lo tsar. In all of their troubles, God was troubled, right? Be'ahavato u'bechemlato hu ge'alam. He came in his love and in his compassion, and he redeemed Am Yisrael. Ve'inatleim ve'inaseim kol yimei olam. So this is really a magnificent ending, but I do have a little bit of a problem with the ending, because here we are, we're on the cusp of Rosh Hashanah, and we're really pleased with the situation, right? And as you know, we had the opportunity to come back to Jerusalem. We found consolation. We found Jerusalem's glory. We found our own role again. Yerushalayim filled up with people. And yet, I would venture to say we're still not prepared for Rosh Hashanah. We're still not prepared to re-enter into a relationship of tefillah with God. And the reason that I say that is because look at the next pasuk in Yeshayahu Samech Gimel. This is how the Haftarah ends. But every time the Haftarah ends this way, I think it's a little bit, I'm going to use the word deceptive, but of course I don't mean that in a critical way, because I know what the next pasuk is, and you're going to know too in a moment. V'hema maru v'itzvu et ruach kodsho v'yafech lehem le'oyev hu nilcham bam. This is probably one of the worst psukim in all of Tanakh, okay? It's one of only 2 places in Tanakh where God becomes the enemy of the people, right? This pasuk says, and then they rebelled against him and he became their enemy. And this sends us spiraling back to Echa again. There are only 2 places in all of Tanakh where God is described as the enemy of Am Yisrael, here and in Echa. And so we kind of find ourselves on the cusp of Rosh Hashanah, but we're still remembering God's enmity in Yeshayahu. How do we get to Rosh Hashanah? How do we fix our relationship with God? See, the problem in Echa, the major problem that is preventing us from getting to Rosh Hashanah, in my opinion, is tefillah, right? Echa leaves us without tefillah. The gever, right? The person in chapter 3 of Echa says, Gamki es akva ashaveh, even when I cry out, even when I plead, Satam tfilati, my prayer is blocked. God is not allowing prayer to get through. How do we get to Rosh Hashanah if we haven't fixed prayer? How do we get to Rosh Hashanah if we haven't reestablished the lines of communication with God? Echa ends by saying to God, God, you've been very angry at us. But Echa does not end by turning to God and saying to God, God, please don't be angry with us. Please restore the lines of communication. Where does this happen? This happens in the next part of Yeshayahu. We're moving towards the end of the prophecies of Nechama, and Yeshayahu says to God, Hey nata katsafta, you were very angry, v'nechata, and we sinned. Look in Pasukei, v'nehi chatamei kulanu. We were all impure. We were all sinful. The ein koreh v'shimcha. This is the Echa problem. And no one, God, is calling on your name. Ein mitorer lahachzik bach. Nobody is awakening to grab you. Ki histarta panecha mimenu. Because you have hidden your face from us. Vatimugenu biad avonenu. We are melting in our sins, and we can't find you. You have hidden your face from us. We don't know how to call you. We don't know how to wake up and reestablish ties with you? How do we get to Rosh Hashanah if this is the continuation of Yeshayahu? Pasuk Zayin. Ve'ata Hashem avinu ata. Anachnu hachomer. Ve'ata yotzreinu. U'maseh yadcha kulanu. That's the transition to Rosh Hashanah. The statement, the belief that you, God, you are a parental figure. Im kivanim rachamenu kirachem av al banim. You, God, are our Father. You created us. Ma'aseh yadcha kulanu. The minute we have that belief, look at the next pasuk. Al tiktsof Hashem ad me'od. Ve'al la'ad tiskor avon. This is the turning around of the end of Echa. Echa ends, katzafta aleinu ad me'od. And here Yeshayahu finally teaches us how we can find the ability to turn to God and say, Al tiktsof Hashem ad me'od. Don't be excessively angry at us. Ve'al la'ad tiskor avon. Don't remember our sin forever. Hen habeitna. Look, God, restore your face to us. Amcha kulanu. We are all your nation. And it's that next movement, one that doesn't take place in the nivuot of Nechama, but which seems to be sort of implied by leaving off the nivuot Nechama just at that point. It is that movement which we have to make in order to be able to go into Rosh Hashanah. And so these haftarot of Nechama, these 7 prophecies of consolation, they are the prophecies that accompany us on that very extraordinary yearly journey from Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah, a journey that we go through every year and which teaches us that even at moments which seem to be where we seem to be in the depths of despair, in those moments, we know that there is a rehabilitative process that lies ahead. That's what we learn every year as we progress through the Sheva D'Nechemta. Okay, so now I will happily open for questions. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Oh, let me say hi. Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Sure. I think after listening to you and how Yeshayahu seems to be responding so much to Eicha, to Yirmiyahu and Eicha, that he's convinced me that it was a different author of Yeshayahu, the second part. That it's a different, he must have lived a different Yeshayahu in a different period. Is that the conclusion?
I mean, that, I don't really draw that conclusion, but I'm not averse to that conclusion. It doesn't really interest me so much. There are different opinions as to whether or not Yeshayahu wrote this second part of Eicha in advance, right? We certainly do believe prophecy can be written in advance. Did he write it in advance? Did he write a whole section about events that have yet to take place, 200 years from his time? I don't know. I can't really draw that conclusion, but I can say that, for me, that's just less relevant. I can say it's possible, but both are possible. So I don't know, issues of authorship are far less critical to me than issues of substance. Okay. Especially since we can't know, we can only speculate.
No, that's true.
Yeah. Is someone raising their hand? Michal?
Hi, yeah, first of all, Yashar Kocheh, these textual connections are amazing and so beautiful to see. I'm trying to wrap my head around the irony, if you will, that all these words of consolation are in the past, and we are once again finding ourselves in exile, even though I imagine at the time that Yeshayahu spoke them, we thought this was it, right? This was our restoration forever. And I'm wondering if Chazal addresses that at all, or what your thoughts are about that undercurrent.
Yeah, well, first of all, it certainly seems to be that at the end of the period of Shivat Zion, which is the book of Malachi, right? The book of Malachi is describing the failure of the period of Shivat Zion, and that seems to be one of the last books in Tanakh. He's already looking forward towards the next exile, right? And so this kind of preparation for exile is ongoing, right? That there is always a sense that humans are fallible, and Am Yisrael is held to a high standard. But if we fail, then exile is on the horizon. That having been said, I don't know. I look at these chapters in Yeshayahu, and I cannot help but feel that they're coming to fruition before my eyes. I mean, I live in Israel, and I watch things that are happening here, and I'm not saying that they're complicated, and I certainly am not saying that Yeshayahu is uncomplicated. I mean, we read some of the very beautiful prophecies, but there are also moments of failure. There are also moments of crisis. There are also moments in which we're not sure we're going to get through it. And sure enough, that redemption has an unfortunate end, right? But I do think that there's a lot in Tanakh that is preparing us for exile. And again, not just the Babylonian exile. I think that Tanakh is preparing us for the possibility of more than one exile, and what tools we need, and what consolation needs to be provided, and also what kinds of lessons we need to take with us when that does happen.
We have a comment in the chat. Ilana Lubin pointed out the pasuk "Anachnu Omer Ba'ata Yotzreinu" seems to call back "Echa nechshavu lemivlei cheres ma'aseh yedei yotzer."
Yes, that is a very astute observation, and that they do seem to be connected. In general, this notion that God can treat us, like an earthenware pot appears in several places in Tanakh. There's a chapter in Yirmiyahu Yud Chet, where God is busily where God takes Yirmiyahu to a potter's house to watch the potter breaking his pottery. And God says, that could be me, right? So again, there is this positive and negative element to God being the yotzer of people, right? The positive element is that he created us, and therefore, we rely on him. The negative element is that we could be disposable, right? Certainly, if we are not living up to the standards for which we were created.
Hey, it seems like that's all the questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Ziegler. This was so lovely, and I think, kind of different from the other learning we've been doing in our fantastic Elzman. I've really been enjoying it. And I just love this sort of continuous feeling of like sort of these seasons of the Jewish calendar and the connections between all of them. I've really enjoyed seeing that. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Ziegler. Thank you to everyone who joined us here on Zoom or on Facebook. And I just want to tell you all, we have, again, like I mentioned, an amazing El Zman, which we're wrapping up and going out really with a bang. We have a very full day even today. At 2:30, Rabbi Lady Morrow is going to be speaking about the potential religious utility of fear at 2:30. So we would love if you could join us. As well, we have a really, really exciting new project that is debuting at 4 p.m., which is a music and liturgy project. It will be coming out on Facebook and on YouTube, and shortly will be available elsewhere. So please check that out. It's very, very exciting. It's been in the works for a while, and I know I'm really excited to check it out. And we've got 10 more classes coming up in the coming week leading up to Rosh Hashanah. So please go to lo.rusha.org and check out all of our really exciting upcoming program. And Shana Tova to everyone. Thank you so much.